It's really wonderful to be here and seeing familiar faces, both from Upaya and walking the trails and being a neighbor. I live just down the street. First, I want to thank sincerely Roshi Joan for inviting me to give the Dharma talk tonight and for being such a supporter of my work in writing in the world. And also thank you to Kodo for getting it set up and reminding me all the things. And of course to my friend Natalie Goldberg, who we've been friends for 13 years. And she, along with Roshi Joan, invited me to give a Dharma talk here in December 2018 that I kind of crashed the Dharma talk. I think Roshi Joan had invited Natalie, and then Natalie was like, Katie, you come too. And but that talk became kind of the framework for brief flashings in the phenomenal world. And that's the book that I just published, and it came out last week, and we had a wonderful celebratory launch. And I'm leaving soon on book tour, but it's a real honor to be here. I've had a long relationship, well, long for me, 13 years. On and off, practicing in the Zendo and also in my sort of wild rogue way out on mountains and beside rivers. And I had just gotten sort of pretty serious about coming in here in person in 2019. I've attended retreats and it was late 2019, early 2020, and I was sitting a lot in here and coming, and the 40-minute sits no longer froze me in terror. I could actually sit through them without wanting to get up and scream and run through, from the room. And then the pandemic hit. And I think like many of us that was a real door shutting, and as it needed to be. But I would often drive, I run the trails all around here. And I just remember that spring after Upaya closed its doors, I would be driving back from the trailhead, and I would want to come in and that scene from The Graduate where Dustin Hoffman at the end is like, Elaine, he's pounding on the door. That's how I felt. And so, but I kept practicing. In a way, I went back to my kind of wild roots, and now I'm sort of in a hybrid. But just walking in here, I was like, oh, I need to come back in person more because it's such a beautiful space. It feels like home. And so anyway, the talk that I gave was in 2018, so that's 6 years ago. And a lot has changed. I know more, also I know less, right? And that's kind of as it should be. But I thought I would just open with reading a little bit from my introduction, which opens with that talk, because when I say a lot has changed and a lot hasn't, I'm still feeling the same way I felt then, right? And so that's that interesting thing about time. It's not, everything is included in this moment, including how I felt then coming into the Zendo. So my plan for tonight is I'm just gonna read a little, chat a little, share some of the flashings, and I'll talk to you about the title in a minute. So this is from the intro. On a cold, snowy December evening, just after Christmas in 2018, I drove half a mile from my house to a Zen Buddhist temple at the foot of a small mountain in Santa Fe. It was not long past sunset, but the dirt road was dark, and the only light was my headlights, two bright cones illuminating the flashing blizzard and the narrow, quickly filling tracks of a car that had traveled the road just ahead of me. I was going to give a talk about running and Zen. I was so nervous, I felt like throwing up. Also, I was strangely calm. It was the darkest night in the darkest month of the year, and the snow fell softly and with great determination and steadiness. The effect was transfixing, as though I was riding a night train to adventure in deepest, farthest Siberia. Something mysterious lay ahead. I was going to discover what it was. At first, giving a talk had seemed like a wonderful idea. I'd learned about Zen through running, and about running through Zen, and about life through both. And I hoped I might have something to offer that could be of use to someone somewhere, fumbling through the dark mysteries of their own life. As the date approached, however, I began to worry. I'm not exactly a walking advertisement for Zen. I wear bright colors and I move fast. I can run for 30 miles, but when I meditate, the longest I seem to manage is 15 minutes. I'm now up to like 20, 25. 20 if I'm feeling very strong. What did I know about sitting? Running was my practice. I realized that I would have to say something that made sense and contributed to the greater good in front of a room full of people who had probably been studying Zen for far longer than I, and much more dutifully, and I fell into a mild panic. I'd been absorbing the ideas of Zen by osmosis for over a decade, but suddenly everything I thought I understood was slipping like seaweed through my grasp. I needed to get a handle on the basics. I needed an explanation. I went to see my friend Natalie. She'd been practicing Zen for more than 30 years. She would know. What is Zen? I asked her desperately. I should have known better than to ask Natalie for a definition. There's rarely a straight answer in Zen, and also every answer, in its own weird way, is a straight answer. Natalie tilted her head and was silent for a long moment, considering her response. Wear black clothes to the Zendo, she said finally, and loose, baggy. That's a good definition for Zen, right? I'm going to skip a little bit. When the temple bell chimed, I got up and walked slowly to a metal chair in the front of the room. My talk was called The Zen of Running, but to talk about running, I would have to talk about the river that broke me and the mountains that healed me. I would have to talk about endings and beginnings and how when you're in the middle, it's almost impossible to tell the two apart. Falling from the boat, so I'm talking about this accident I'd had, falling from the boat felt like a hard stop. A boulder rolled into the middle of a long tunnel, impassable. It was only after I healed from that accident that I saw my injury for what it was, a beginning wrapped around countless other beginnings. It was the start of something deeper, a spiritual practice, my own kind of wild Zen, an experiment in how to live and wake up to the brief flashings all around us. They were so beautiful, they took your breath away, and they were so easy to miss. I didn't want to miss them anymore. Lifting my gaze, I looked at the faces before me. Their expressions were expectant but open, their bodies still but alert. They had come to receive something. All I had to do was offer it. Yet I couldn't tell them how to live. I could only tell them how I lived. I remember something a person had once said to me. You could share all your secrets and still not give everything away. I did not know him well and would not know him for long, but I understood what he meant. We each have our own true way. We can imitate or be inspired, but we can only really ever be ourselves. This is not a story about running or Zen, nor marriage, nor motherhood. And it's a book about all of these things. I can't give you the 6 simple steps to enlightenment or the top 10 tips for running faster. But I gladly offer you my secrets and these brief flashings in the phenomenal world that crack open the sky and make us blink with wonder. The answers, if there are any, are yours to discover. So this was the intro, and it sets up what the book is going to be, which is the story of this tumultuous and very traumatic river accident that I experienced in June of 2016. And my husband and I do a lot of river trips. We love to be in wild canyons. It's a way to be in flow with each other and the natural world, and away from technology. And we've done many river trips together. We take our children. But this was a trip we were doing ourselves. The Middle Fork is a very technical river. It's a 100-mile stretch of river with 100 rapids in 100 miles, right? So that number 100 will come back later in the book. So it's extremely technical. And on the second day of the trip, or on the first day of the trip rather, in the second mile of the trip, so in river miles, probably a mile 97.8, we had a fluke accident, and we wrapped our raft on a rock. And this is an unguided trip. We were guiding ourselves with a group of friends. And I flipped out of the boat and very badly injured myself. And so Brief Flashings tells the story of that accident and kind of the trauma that followed, and how in the wake of being so injured and being told by my doctor that I should never run again, I turned to Zen as a way to sort of heal my mind in order to heal my body. And that was not a conscious thought, right? Like in Zen, we're not supposed to have this gaining idea of like, I am going to use Zen for X or Y. And it's funny when I talk about this book to people who are not Zen practitioners, they're always like, so did you use it? You know, did it? And I always have to be careful. Like, I just tried to absorb the teachings and live them. And so the book really tells that story. And as I'm going deeper into the Zen teachings and learning about them, I realized that all around us all the time, and I've seen them before, but are these brief flashings in the phenomenal world. Like, and being more present in ourselves and in our lives awakens us to the flashings that are always happening. And as a writer, I've always had a practice of watching for them, right? Writing is nothing if not paying attention to the world. And so I'd been aware of them, but I had never heard of them described in the way that I came to read about them in the Zen book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which becomes a very fundamental companion for me during my long recovery. And in fact, Natalie, my friend Natalie Goldberg, is the one who brought it to me. And we'd been friends for like 7 or 8 years by then. And if you know Natalie, the story's going to make sense. But you know, we walk up the mountain, we talk about Zen, we talk about not Zen, which is also Zen, you know, and children and dogs and whatnot. But she comes over about like 6 months after I've been injured, and the doctor has told me I shouldn't run again. I've just started running again, very tentatively, like fearful that like springs are gonna like explode out of my knee, you know, just, but she walks in my house and like barely with a word, you know, without a word, she just kind of like opens her purse and like flings this book toward me. And it's Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, in fact, this copy. And Natalie's like, you know what, it's time you read this. But she's like, you know, I'm just warning you, you're probably not gonna understand anything. And I had known Natalie long enough that I was like, I'm not insulted by that. Like, she didn't really mean it like as a, you know, comment on my intellect, but more on the teachings themselves and how enigmatic and esoteric they can be. And so I put the book on the shelf for a couple of days, but I'm an avid reader and I was between books. And so I was like, all right, I'm gonna start. And as soon as I started reading, I understood everything because I understand running. And I realized that if I just replace sitting with running, Suzuki Roshi and I were totally speaking the same language. And I remember texting Natalie and I was like, I don't want to sound presumptuous, but like, I feel like Suzuki Roshi is inside my brain. And Natalie was just like, good, keep reading. And I think that I understood Zen Mind because I was reading it and understanding it through my body, not with my brain. And I've since read it many times. I joke that it's like the Golden Gate Bridge, like you finish reading and you have to start over, and then wherever you are in your life, like you read it through that lens. So early on, and I've marked it up a ton, like I read it for the running, and I was like, how am I gonna, you know, this might be my guide for relearning how I'm going to run. Because I knew it was going to be different. The accident like stopped and changed everything. And I saw even then, even probably before I got Beginner's Mind, I was like, I feel like this is going to be a good thing. Deep down. On the surface, I was, you know, in despair. But I had this sense that I needed to reinvent my running. And so then later when I would read it as a writer and be like, you can't enforce your will, or, you know, and I was like, perfect. Like I've got to listen to the story. Like I can't come barging into my book and like try to, you know, boss it around. And so there's always something in here. And so as soon as I was reading it the first time from Nat, I was like, Nat, why did you hold out on me? I can't believe you've never told me about this book. And, you know, it was instructions for sitting, but I felt like I discovered like instructions for living. And like that it contained like all the secrets and not so secret things that you needed to know just about being alive. So this became my companion. And as I did my healing, and the healing was very gradual. Like, as I said, the accident, my leg was shattered, and the doctor who was like, you shouldn't run again. And then I started very gradually, and this was my first lesson from the book, is like, you can't cling to what you want. So like, don't have this picture right away. I had been doing a lot of ultra marathons prior to the accident and had a lot of success. And, but I knew enough, both from the doctor who was like, you know, all bets are off, and from reading the book that like, I couldn't lead with my running with being like, I am going to, you know, run 50 miles again, or I'm going to run, period. I had to be in that state of not knowing and not grasping. And so that was the first lesson, is just be in this moment, like, and be in the not knowing. And I think that that's not a very, like, we're not taught or encouraged to be in not knowing. We are expected to have the answers and prescriptions, and, you know, even in writing this book, I had to push against that. And I allude to that in the intro, which is like, I can't give you these tips. I can't tell you how to run or be, right? And Zen is very big on that. Like, the old masters were teaching through their actions, you know, and even Suzuki Roshi and Dogen before him were like, you know, read and study, but don't put all your weight on that. Just live. And so I was like, I can't tell people how to be or live, and I can't expect my running. I can't expect anything. And so that was the first big teaching, was that I had to, you know, in the words of Suzuki Roshi, I had to be a beginner again. And there's nothing that brings you back to beginner's mind than actually an accident where you have to start over. And in fact, the surgeon, when I went in to see him before surgery, and I had burned up all my time, I couldn't get second opinions because I'd spent 6 days on the river. We stayed on the river with my broken leg. And so I didn't have any time. I just had to go with this surgeon. And I was in the waiting room, and I was in his examining room, and I was like, you know, it's feeling better. Like, is it possible that it's healing? And he just looked at me just with such pity, and he's, you know, in that way of like, oh, you poor thing, like, what do you know? And he's like, it's not healing, it's shattered. And he's like, and you don't have pain now, but you're going to, like, I'm gonna take you back to zero. And those words like haunted me, right? This zeroing out, and is such a terrifying place when you're used to, like, we build our identities around, like, I'm a runner, like the nouns, like the things we do. And this just like shot me down to the kneecaps, where I was like, who am I? I felt like a house that had been torn down to the studs. And even in that extreme discomfort of feeling that way, I knew that that was an important thing to feel. And that it would lead me somewhere. I just had no idea where. And so his words echoed for me. And so that when I started reading Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, I recognized zero in there, of like being at zero, being a beginner again. And I started to see my zero, or the surgeon's zero, in a different way, of like, not this terrifying place. I mean, it was quite traumatic for many, many weeks, but then there's like a beauty in zero. Anything is possible. And so I started running again with that mindset of like, the doctor said I'm going to get X, Y, and Z terrible things if I start. But really, zero means actually anything could happen. And he knows no more than I know. And so that long healing process became a story of kind of reclaiming my story and not just going with what he said. And my story was very much the story in here of coming to something with fresh, open mind and humility, and a willingness to have no idea what you're doing or where you're going. And so gradually I start running again, and I build up, and my leg's holding up, but I'm careful not to want too much. You know, like, I'm careful not to picture myself running another ultra marathon, or you know, certainly not winning anything. And so I go, I decided to go back. A few years earlier, I'd gone to the Grand Canyon, and I'd run the rim to rim to rim, which is like from the south rim to the river, to the north, back to the river, and to the south. And it's 42 miles. And I had done it in a day, in like about 9 hours and 15 minutes, which I didn't know at the time. And I think I've always sort of run with this mindset of like, I'm not a conventional runner. Like I don't follow a training plan. So I always sort of had this like beginner's mindset of like, I don't know, I'm not being strict with my training. And that day I had set what in ultra running is called an FKT, a fastest known time, without knowing it, which is so ironic. So I had run with some friends and then we sort of spread out along the trail, and I had just been completely present, so absorbing all the sights and smells and the sounds and the sunrise, and I had disappeared into the canyon. And I stopped on the way back at the river at the boat beach where all the raft trips launched to resupply and whatnot. And I like dunked in the water and I was just like enjoying the river, and I ran back up and I checked my watch and it had been 9 hours and 15 minutes and I had no idea what the time was. Again, like I had not set out to do anything like that. And it was only later that I looked and I was like, oh, I feel like maybe that's like a record or something. And anyway, so my point is, that was a few years earlier. And so after my leg had healed, I really felt called to go back to the Grand Canyon. And more than just to duplicate my experience, because I knew from reading Zen Mind that is not a good idea. And so I want to read from this section called Forgetting. And my reasons, as you'll hear, for going back to the canyon were bigger than running. Okay, chapter 18, Forgetting. There's a concept in Zen called no trace. It's like the well-known wilderness ethic, when in nature we should pack out our trash, cover our tracks, and travel gently so that we leave minimal physical evidence of having been there. In Zen, the trace often refers to our thoughts. When we have ideas of how something should be or how life once was or might someday become, our thoughts leave a trace, a shadow of expectation, a residue of preconceived ideas and judgment covers our present experience. These traces make our minds very complicated, Suzuki Roshi writes in Zen Mind. When we do something with a quite simple, clear mind, we have no notions or shadows, and our activity is strong and straightforward. It was November 2017, so this is about a year and a few months after my accident, and I was going to run 42 miles across the Grand Canyon and back in a day. I'd done it once before, 4 years earlier. That first time, I hadn't cared about my time or if I was running fast and well, which had freed me to run fast and well, and to set what I would only later learn was the fastest known time, a women's record that would stand for 7 years. It would be hard to top that day or to forget it, which I didn't want to ever. I just couldn't hold on too tightly to the memory, or else I'd make it impossible for myself to go back. We should forget day by day what we have done, advises Suzuki Roshi. This is true non-attachment, and we should do something new. To do something new, of course, we must know our past, and this is all right. But we should not keep holding on to anything we have done. We should only reflect on it. I'd been having a funny feeling about my writing recently. I was writing at the time Running Home, which is a book about running and my father's death. I'd been having a funny feeling about Running Home, as though my book about my father could be reduced to 4 words: living, dying, writing, and running. And that maybe it needed nothing more than those 4 words. Had I written a whole book of words just to come to this point, to see that the stories themselves were tangential? The book existed without me now. It could stand on its own as those 4 words, and maybe someday I could stand on it. I wondered if the same could be true of my running, if it could exist without me, if I could run so deep into the Grand Canyon that I ran beyond myself, leaving no trace. You must be true to your own way until at last you come to the point where you see it is necessary to forget all about yourself, wrote Suzuki Roshi. It was the best line in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, its own beautiful, confounding koan. If I could forget myself, would I run faster without trying to be faster? So the chapter goes on to talk about that day, and the answer is no, because I got halfway down the South Rim, the South Kaibab Trail, and realized I was sick. And I had like flu, like heat waves coming off of me, and a scratchy throat, and I'm sweating profusely. And of course, I'm like, well, I'm just gonna wait a little bit. You know, this is the ultra runner's mindset, which is also Zen, you know, continuous practice, keep going. And so I was like, I'm just gonna wait, I'll see how I feel. And then I was like, I'm gonna get to the river, which is 7 miles down, and I'm going to reassess. Well, I get to the river and like just sweating and feeling awful. And there I'm refilling, I'm like, I'm gonna refill my water at the spigot, and then I'm definitely turning around. And I get to the spigot, and I literally look down. By my feet, there's 2 dusty red pills in the ground, the exact color of Advil. And I look at them, and I'm kind of delirious, and I was like, what are those? And of course I picked them up. But I'm in sort of a state and that I'm like, what if they're not? Like, what if it's like flu medicine? I start hallucinating. So I was like, I can't take these. And so I tucked them in my pocket, and I was like, I'm just gonna run a little ways till I figure out what to do. And the next big like mile marker is Cottonwood Campground, which is 7 miles up from the river. This is the most gradual, runnable spot in the canyon. It's quite beautiful, and you know, it climbs gradually. And so I'm just running, like now increasingly delirious. And I get to Cottonwood, and there are these 2 guys there, and I'm like so happy to see them. I like fall over myself. I'm like, hi, do you know what these are? And I pull the pills out. And they look at me again with like that surge, and it's just like, what pity. And the guy, I'm not kidding, he pulls out from his pocket an entire Ziploc. It must be like 400 identical pills. And of course they're Advil. You know, and like, why would anyone carry that many Advil? Like, it was obscene. And he's like, they're Advil. And I was like, great. And he's like, I said, I'm sick. He's like, I can see that. And anyway, he's like, do you want ours? And this is where I'm totally lost it. I was like, no, I'm just gonna eat mine. So I eat the dusty, dirty Advil. And they're like, okay, you know, and they're like, we live in Phoenix, we come here all the time. And I was like, well, I live in Santa Fe, and the last time I was here was like 5 years ago, and I've broken my leg, and I've healed, and I'm back, and like, it's not that easy for me to get here. So I was like, I'm just gonna sit on this bench until the Advil kick in, and then I'm turning around to go back. And they're like, okay. And I sit on the bench for a little bit, and these women come bounding down the trail, like in the direction I've just come, and they're very bouncy and fresh, and I think they've started from the North Rim. And I start following them down the trail, like they're pulling me, because I'm like, I have to turn around. This is the responsible thing. And I go for like 5 steps, and I'm like, I can't do it. And so I turn back around, and I'm running back up toward the North Rim. I just can't do it. I can't quit. And so the most, you know, shaming part is that I have to pass the men again. And so I get to the men, and I'm so embarrassed, and I was just like, just waiting for the Advil to kick in, you know, bye-bye. And then now I'm committed. I've got like 7 miles to the North Rim, and I get there, and I kind of lurch up, and now I'm wiped. The Advil got me there, and this woman looks at me, and she's parked her car because I think she's supporting someone who's running, and she has Dr. Pepper, and she gives me Dr. Pepper, and you know, it revives me, but I have 22 miles or 21 miles to get back. And long story short, I make it finally back. I like heave myself up onto the South Rim. I'm crying. I'm so ashamed that I've done this, that I've kept going, pushing, you know, when I shouldn't have. And, you know, I have 2 daughters. I'm like, what if I'd like collapsed? But the whole time I'd been making assessments, I was like, my body's fine. I have plenty of food. I have plenty of water. So, you know, I was making these assessments. But this next part I'm going to read is like afterwards. Back in Santa Fe, I told Natalie the whole story. I expected her to scold me, but instead she said, oh, that's true, Zen. You just kept going. It didn't seem Zen to me. It seemed reckless and dumb, but I knew what she meant. She was talking about great determination, continuing onward without becoming deterred by difficulties or details, bad weather or attitude, preferences or positions. As Dogen famously wrote, fearing the swift passing of the sunlight, practice the way as though saving your head from fire. But continuing in the Zen way does not mean going forward blindly, masochistically, leaving your body in the dirt to die. It requires prudence and equanimity. In some circumstances, it may mean stopping so you can get up the next day to do it again. You don't have to believe in Zen to have a Zen spirit, to have patience and endurance. I knew all of this, and still I suspected that I should have stopped. Nat was giving a Dharma talk at the Zen Center in a few days and asked if she could tell my story. This is exactly what my talk is about, she said. Going up the mountain is the same as going down. Before I went to the Grand Canyon, I would have told her this was silly. Going up is totally different. Everyone knows this. It's harder. And going down is easier, faster. You can let gravity carry you. But now I understood it was nothing like that. Really, they are the same. You have to go all the way down, and then you have to climb out. You can't say one is better, the other worse, one is bad, the other good. The same is true for running or not running, for starting and stopping, feeling sick or feeling well, winning or losing. You meet a thing head on and you do it, whatever it is. When you do something, you should do it with your whole body and mind, Suzuki Roshi wrote. You should do it completely, like a good bonfire. You should not be a smoky fire. Zen activity is an activity which is completely burned out, with nothing remaining but ashes. I thought it was my ego that kept me going, but maybe I had run beyond myself, so far that I'd left my body behind. I'd been a muddled, indecisive, bawling mess. I'd cried like a lot, not knowing what to do. But even so, the activity, the running itself, had been strong and straightforward. I'd gone across the canyon and back. I'd burned it all down to ashes. It had been nothing like I imagined, a transcendence that felt exactly like obstinance. To release it all, I'd had to carry it all. The grubby Advil and my creeping terror and shame and the energy of the women with the bouncy ponytails and the icy lemonade I drank at Phantom Ranch, the anxiety I couldn't shake, and the feeling that I was younger than any of it and older than I'd ever been. So, what time do we go to, Noah? A few more minutes? So that was this really profoundly humbling experience that it took me a long time to understand, because as I write, like I thought I had just been stubborn, and it took me a while to see that is that Zen spirit. So the last section I'm going to read is round about that time, a little bit after I got back from the Grand Canyon, I put my name in for the Leadville 100 trail run lottery, which is up in Colorado, and it's probably the biggest and hardest 100-mile race in the country. It hovers around 10,000 feet in elevation and goes up to 12,500. And I was running and training with the ideas of Zen, which is like right effort, and no gripping to ideas of results. And so I was running each day for that day. And I didn't know who else was running the race. I didn't know what the times were, what the winning times. And I was so in that mindset. So I'm going to read from this chapter about the Leadville race. It was so beautiful. It had all been so beautiful. Driving into Leadville, I'm so overcome by emotion at the sight of the mountains, I have to pull over onto the shoulder. To the west rises the broad summit of Mount Elbert at 14,440 feet, the highest peak in Colorado. The Leadville 100 course snakes along the mountain's broad forested base to Twin Lakes, then climbs steeply to Hope Pass, I love that name, and down the other side to Winfield. I've run it in my body. I'd been there a few weeks earlier to train. And now, as I blink back tears of gratitude for being here and being healed, finally whole, I'm running it in my mind. Do not doubt that green mountains are always walking, Dogen wrote. Even something so stalwart as a mountain, seemingly so still, is dynamic and alive. Whatever happens, good, bad, ugly, finish, or drop, means quit the race, will be icing on the cake. A celebration of how I've gotten here and what I've learned, the least of which is about running. Make sincere effort for the good. Be yourself. Let go. Keep going. And I'll skip a few pages. A long race is like all of life lived in a single day. It rained and the sun came out. I ate energy gels and drank Coke and climbed Hope Pass going south and then back up again going north, this time with my husband Steve pacing me. We passed dozens of runners charging downhill to the turnaround, and one cried out, "Great job," in an Australian accent. Steve behind me erupts into song. I come from the land down under. Over and over, we belt out Men at Work songs until at last we ascend out of the trees and into the alpine and reach the top of Hope Pass at 12,600 feet. Steve hands me a styrofoam cup of miso soup at the aid station. Then it's nowhere to go but down. In Twin Lakes, I catch up with the first place woman. Her name is Addie, Steve tells me, and he hands me over to Joe, who's pacing me the next 15 miles. And together, he and I work our way up the long hill and into the lead. I have the oddest sensation of being neither ahead nor behind myself, but right where I am, exactly in the center of effort. Not more than I can handle, not less. Just right, running as the mountain itself. I'll skip ahead a little bit. Spoiler alert, I hadn't set out to win Leadville. I simply stuck with my plan to stay in flow as long as I could and then hold on to the end. I'd eaten all my calories. I used my trekking poles and sang Men at Work and loved my husband the whole way up Hope Pass. I ran a block along a dirt road through Twin Lakes beside Maisie, she's my younger daughter, who was dressed as a whoopee cushion, and high-five strangers cheering my name, and old friends and others I'd just met but felt as though I'd known forever. I drafted behind Joe and listened to Whitesnake and worried when my pacer Wes grew quiet. I ran through a river in sopping sneakers and watched the sunset and rode the mountains all the way to the end. I felt as though I'd been floating all day and could just keep going and going, like time itself. For a little while at least, I'd closed the gap. It wasn't beginner's luck that had helped me win Leadville. It was beginner's mind. Thank you.